Let's play a little game, shall we? Put a finger down if you grew up in the projects. Put a finger down if you've been in a drive-by or near a drive-by. Put a finger down if you grew up in a single-parent household. Put a finger down if you were told you don't act Black enough. Put a finger down if you've been told you act too Black. Hi, my name is Nikeya Young, and adversity fuels me. And I'd like to share with you 5 steps to use setbacks to propel you forward. So let's get into it. Number 1, look how far you've come. I mean, really, let's just sit and look at this for a moment. When our ancestors were freed from slavery, and I use the term freed loosely, in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, they weren't exactly let go with a to-go package. They weren't given food. They weren't given 40 acres and a mule. None of that. They were essentially told, okay, you're free. Bye. And that was it. So as a result, thousands and thousands of slaves were starved to death or died of horrible diseases when they were left to fend for themselves at the end of slavery. So if you are living in this country as a descendant of slaves, you are indeed a walking, talking, living, breathing miracle. And yes, you may have your fair share of adversity to still face today in this country, but my, oh my, look how far you have come compared to where you started. Number 2, rejoice when you're underestimated. Okay, now this one is one of my favorites. Does it feel good to be underestimated? No, it actually sucks. However, I want to give you a fresh perspective. When people underestimate you or blatantly reject you or pretend not to see you, it actually says more about them than it ever will about you. Okay? Don't let that shake you. Continue to fine-tune your vision, continue to work hard behind the scenes, and most importantly, keep in mind that you have absolutely nothing to prove to anybody else other than yourself. Keep these things in mind, and you will have the sweet feeling of rising to the top and looking the same people in the eyes who tried to keep you from getting there and watching the shock on their faces. What is she doing here? What is he doing here? There is no greater feeling in the world. Number 3, give yourself credit. You're actually a lot stronger than you think. Being placed in adverse situations gives you an inner resilience that is absolutely priceless. Think about some of the funniest comedians that you've ever seen. Some of my faves are Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, and Bernie Mac. All of them, and Dave Chappelle, can't forget Dave Chappelle. They have some backstories that are not for the weak, but they've been able to parlay their trauma and their adverse experiences into multi-million-dollar careers. People who aren't necessarily used to dealing with adversity, when hard times hit them, it really throws them for a loop. But people who are used to dealing with adverse situations, they pretty much shrug it off and move on. They may have a temporary moment of sadness, but they don't let it completely derail their day. For example, during the pandemic, Black Twitter was in rare form. Some of the most hilarious memes came out of that time period. We had Club Quarantine with DJ D Nice putting on some epic concerts for us. We had the Versus celebrations. Anything adverse that happens to Black people, we find a way to find the funny in it. So give yourself credit. You're stronger than you think. Number 4, Get creative. This actually piggybacks off the last point. Think about our ancestors. We are masters at doing a lot with a little bit. For example, George Washington Carver, one of the most prolific scientists of the 20th century, has said to be has said to have created about, I think it was 300 something products out of a peanut. He single-handedly revolutionized the economy in the South by trying to find ways for poor sharecroppers to make more money with crops other than cotton. And he came up with all of these different uses for the peanut. And this man was actually born into slavery. And if he got creative and did all of that with the very little that he had to start with, what more can you do today with blood of ancestors like that running through your veins? Number 5, embrace being twice as good. This twice as good, we've been told this saying, you have to be twice as good in order to get half of what they or white people have. We've been told this by grandparents, our parents, aunties, uncles. And while it may not be as true today for us as it was for them back in the day, unfortunately, there's still some truth to it. We know that our work is going to be checked and double checked. So we tend to put even more into it. We tend to be brilliant and be even more educated. We're some of the most educated people in the United States of America, Black women specifically, and men too. So even though the reasons behind it may be less than ordeal, it's time that we embrace being twice as good. When you have this in the background, knowing that the system is absolutely positively rigged for you to fail, you don't take things for granted. You have an inner drive to succeed that most people may not understand. Use that to your advantage. Here's a good example, another example of this that I see. Whenever I see immigrants come to the United States of America from other countries, they look around and they see the opportunity for growth that exists in this country that didn't exist in countries that they came from, and they get to work. They are willing to live well below their means to start with. And then before you know it, you look up and they are in some of the top positions in this country. And some people may be wondering, hey, how did they get there? How did that happen? Because they didn't take for granted the opportunities that we have today. They saw something better. They saw a vision and they kept that vision in the forefront of their minds. And they were determined that, yes, they were going to be twice as good. We have that same motivation because we do, in fact, have to be twice as good. But that's not a bad thing. Allow that to propel you forward. And those are just 5 tips that I have for using setbacks to propel you forward. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Nikeya Young.
The topic of racism in sports remains a hot button issue. The opinion of athletes on their social media feeds are starting to become less and less accepted by the public, which makes this talk a timely topic to discuss this Black History Month. You know, playing sports has always been a favorite of mine. You see, I grew up in an urban community in Brooklyn, New York called Bedford-Stuyvesant. And naturally, we played in the streets and the local ball fields. I eventually played sports at the collegiate level. And the highlight of my sports career was receiving an opportunity to try out for the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball organization. Sports has always been a way to promote camaraderie and bring people from different backgrounds together. However, racism still exists in many sports organizations and leagues. This problem has become especially apparent in recent years with the increase of incidents involving racially charged comments and actions by players, coaches, and spectators. Racism, discrimination, prejudice, and bias in sports often starts at the top of an organization. We notice this by observing which coaches are hired and which players are retained. It can also be seen in how fans are treated. Oftentimes, these organizations are slow to address issues of racism, even when they are brought to their attention. Fans also contribute to the problem of racism in sports. Many times they use racist language and make negative comments about other players or teams based on their race. This type of behavior is unacceptable and has no place in sports. It is important that we all work together and address this issue. You and I can start by using our voices to speak out against racism wherever it exists. The history of racism in sports is a long and troubling one. From the days of segregated sports, like when Major League Baseball banned Black players until 1947, and they allowed Jackie Robinson to break the modern-day color barrier, to collegiate athletes struggling to realize a full measure of success in predominantly white organized sport. Black players were forced to attend HBCUs, that's historically Black colleges and universities, schools, and those Black schools were forced to establish its separate sporting organizations, most notably the CIAA in 1912, soon to be followed by the MEAC Conference and then the SWAC Conference. To the ongoing issue of the present day, people of color have been routinely discriminated against when trying to participate in or even watch sports. Racism remains an active and systematic problem in sports. This reality was forcefully brought into focus a few years ago when professional football player Colin Kaepernick began to protest racial injustice by kneeling down or kneeling during the national anthem. Kaepernick's actions were met with fierce backlash from fans and members of the media, who accused him of being unpatriotic and disrespecting the military. Then, of course, we heard language like, "Get that son of a bitch off the field," or "Just shut up and dribble." What made the former comment so outstanding was that those words came from the highest office in the land. In looking back, Kaepernick's protests may have had a positive impact on race relations in sports. Since he made headlines, several other players followed his lead and started protesting different forms of social injustice. This movement has given voice to marginalized communities and raised awareness about the issues they face. Now, the NFL has made significant strides in recent years with people of color on the field. In a recent report by the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport, also known as TIDES, as of 2020, 58% of NFL players are Black and 69% of NFL players are people of color. However, that said, when it comes to head coaching positions, Black or African-American representation in 2020 was 9%, and only 13% of head coaches were of color. 15% of league office vice presidents and above were people of color. And to date, only 3 people of color are co or principal owners of an NFL team, and none are American born or of African descent. So how do we solve this problem? Well, as I close, there are several ways to combat racism in sports. Here's the first thing. Players and fans need to be keenly aware of the problem. Now, notice I use the word keenly aware. That's because sometimes we can see a problem, we can overlook a problem, we can step over a problem, we can ignore a problem, hoping someone else takes care of it, and we just refuse to be keenly aware of the problem. Not only to be keenly aware of it, but we have to be willing to talk about it. Have to be willing to sit down with one another and have conversations about what's going on, about racist language, microaggressions towards players and other people. Those conversations must be had, because if we don't talk about it, it'll remain covered and the problem will never be solved. Here's the second thing. Professional organizations like the NFL and Major League Baseball and the NCAA need to create significant policies. Oh yeah, I know you have policies, but are they significant? Do they have teeth? Will they make the necessary changes in your organization? So you have to create significant policies that address racism and make sure that all players are treated equitably and that the door is wide open for African Americans to earn management positions and be owners of a sports team. Because there is no real effective hiring of African Americans and other people of color without being in charge or being an owner of a team. Here's the third thing. Athletes and coaches need to be outspoken. You need to be an outspoken advocate for change, not just when it comes to race, but also inequality in other areas such as gender or social economic status. Somebody has to speak up for the issue. And finally, the media. The media should not just look for sensationalized stories for profit, but seek issues to spotlight where you can help bring about change and solutions to the problem of racism in sports. The key is to start talking about these issues and start seeing progress made. Let's work together. If we do, we can root out racism, not only for Black History Month, but all year round. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once asked a group of middle school students the question, "What is in your life's blueprint?" A great question, he said, because a blueprint will act as the guide to prepare them for the future and the challenges that they had ahead. And he said the challenges that you're facing are that you're going to step into opportunities, or you're going to have opportunities presented to you that were never presented to your parents, never presented to your grandparents. And so you got to prepare yourself when you step into these rooms of opportunity where people don't want you, where people don't believe you don't belong. And no matter what you do, some people will never like you. So how do you go about preparing yourself for the future? The first thing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wanted them to understand was you've got to prepare your mind. You got to transform your mind to prepare yourself for the mind games that are going to be played, whether they're played on you or you're playing them on yourself. Now, you ask, Eric, what do you mean I'm playing mind games on myself? Well, I want you to imagine yourself standing at the door of an opportunity that you've always wanted. And as you stand there, I want you to really think about that dream, that goal, as well as what it means to you, how important it is to you, what it would change for you. And as you think about that, now you move into, now it's time to commit to opening that door and walking that threshold into the life you want to live. What happens? Well, at that moment that you've got to commit to making a decision to walk through that door, negativity starts to flow in and you start convincing yourself, I don't belong there. I'm not good enough. I'm not ready. I don't have the support. I can't do this. What if I fail? And as you start convincing you that negativity, that doubt, the worry, the fear that's flowing through your mind begins to fill it up with what I call mental quicksand. And that mental quicksand, if you allow it to, will keep you stuck and sinking for the rest of your life. Here's why. It's the reason why Benjamin Franklin said many people will die at the age of 25 and wait to be buried at 75. They're burying themselves in their own mental quicksand, not believing in who they are, not believing they have what it takes, not believing that they'll ever be able to accomplish anything more in life. And they wait to be buried until 75. So here's what I want you to know. That life is one that I had to give up. I had to decide that my family was more important, that my dreams were more important, that I was more important to living a life of purpose. And so in doing that, I had to find a way to escape my own mental quicksand, where I told myself I wasn't good enough, where I told myself that I wasn't going to be able to make it, that I didn't have anything else to offer. Case in point, I'm on the phone with somebody I wanted to learn from. I wanted to learn everything that they knew about the speaking business, how to inspire others. And I wanted to be great just like they were. I wanted to be able to inspire lives like he did mine. And when he told me he could coach me, he told me he could take me under my wing and under his wing and teach me what I needed to learn, I said no. You know why? Because I didn't believe I had what it took. And so I said no. And when I hung up the phone and walked away, I kicked myself in the butt over and over again because I knew I missed out on another opportunity to change my life, to change life for my family. And when I did that, I decided that I was going to work on myself. But I really didn't commit like I needed to commit. 6 years later, I had the opportunity again. Same phone call, same result. It would take me another 4 years before I would actually work with Mr. Les Brown, the great motivational speaker he is. And I worked with him for a year. And what I learned is that I'm really excited about my life now because I have the power that I need to create the life I want to live. I have the ability to be able to go out and inspire others because I have been able to speak to people in 20 different countries and inspire them to change their lives. I'm a two-time international best-selling co-author because I've worked on myself. More importantly, I get up every day and not only am I working on myself, but I'm helping others change their lives. I'm helping and coaching others realize their potential, realize the power that they have to move forward and open the doors of opportunity. So what I want you to understand is that Dr. Martin Luther King that night, he told the students that the first thing you must do in preparing yourself for the future is that you got to believe in you, believe that you have worth and believe in your own somebodyness because you deserve to be here. You deserve to live the life that you want to live. You deserve everything you want in life, to be able to help others, to be able to move forward with the dreams and goals you have for yourself because you have everything that you will need to develop the life you want to live. Here's what I'm talking about. The poem Equipment says that you have 2 arms, 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and a brain to use if you would be wise. So I need you. No, you need you to believe that you have everything that the greats who have walked this earth have because you are equipped with it. And I want you to understand that every man who wakes up with a great deed to do started their life with no more than you. So you've got what it takes. You're starting from the right place, but you've got to believe in you. Buy into you, because if you don't, who will? Here's what I want you to do. Every day, I want you to wake up and say to yourself, the greatness I seek comes from within. One more time. The greatness I seek comes from within. One more time, and I need you to really believe that. Buy into it. The greatness I seek comes from within, because you do have greatness in you. I know you don't believe it now, but if you go to your work on yourself, that greatness you seek will uncover itself, and you'll begin to do things that you never thought you could do. Something else Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told those students that night, he said, you must commit to commit to a level of excellence. And what he wants to is commit to a principle of excellence, means that I want you to write this down. High level results are not products of low level effort. I'll say it one more time. High level results are not products of low level effort. So you got to step your game up. And a commitment to excellence means that you step your game up from the average performance you've been putting on to a level of excellence where you do so well that people will come from afar to watch you do exactly what you do. A quote I like is, if you set yourself on fire, people will come from great distances to watch you burn. And that's what you want to do. You got to perform so well that people will say that here lies a great street sweeper, as Dr. Martin Luther King said in his speech, because you have the greatness that you need. All you got to do is buy into you and start performing. And understand this: adversity sets the stage from which great feats have been performed. I'm telling you, you got what you need to make it happen. So the next time you get knocked down, start preparing for your comeback, because you are now on the stage that you need to perform great feats and bounce back to live the life that you've always wanted to live. What else did Dr. Martin Luther King say we must do? We must embrace an internal principle of love, peace, and happiness and justice. That means you got to love thy brother, support thy brother, and help thy sister. You know why? Because your life is bigger than you. It's about you, but it's bigger than you. And it's about you connecting to others and helping them through their challenges, helping them through their visions and goals and dreams, helping them discover who they are so that the two of you can combine to help others as well. I was once asked the question, can one man change the world? And immediately I said no. But because I didn't want to be embarrassed and I didn't want to be laughed out, I quickly changed it to yes, even though I was still confused. But we would go on in class and discuss Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Civil Rights Movement, the March on Washington, and his speech, I Have a Dream. And now here we stand some 60 years later after the March on Washington, some 55 years after his death, talking about Dr. Martin Luther King, honoring him and those who worked in that civil rights movement to change things for us and to create opportunities for us that our parents and our grandparents never experienced. So here's what I want you to know. You got something in you that many people don't believe in. And I want you to know this. The greatness you seek comes from within, and you've got what it takes to be able to accomplish whatever it is you want to accomplish. But I need you. No, you need you to believe in you and go after what it is you want to accomplish in this world. But it starts right here. Free yourself from that negative mindset. Free yourself from the doubt, fear, and worry that's flowing through your mind and keeping you stuck in that mental quicksand state of mind. So I'll leave you with this. The handicap you must face is you. You are the one holding yourself back. You are your own worst enemy, but I need you to stop. Today is the day that you stop doing that. I want you to get curious about what you could become, because what you could become is infinite and what you could do is infinite. So when you get out there and you start living that life of freedom, when you start living a life of happiness, when you start living in that life of accepting those challenges and opportunities to get better, trust me, ladies and gentlemen, you'll start connecting with those who love what you do, and they will travel afar to help you do what you do. Take care. I'm Eric Collier, the mayor of motivation. You can connect with me at the website onemomentumshift.com or email me at cericcollier@gmail.com. That's CERICCOLLIER@gmail.com.
You know that phrase, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been? even in law, we have precedents, which means that we look at previous rulings and we're able to determine what we're going to rule on in the future. And that's what we need to do when it comes to business. So that's why I think it's incredibly important when we look at leaders in the past to see what did they have in order to create great transformation. And that's why I'm going to talk about the relationship between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln when it came to abolishing slavery. Now, my name is Kalilah Hudson. I'm a public speaking coach. I'm the owner of K-Head Coaching, and I teach people how to speak in an authentic way on camera. But most importantly, I am an absolute lover of history. I majored in political science. I've been watching history since I was little, when, before the History Channel was talking about crop circles and aliens. That's as long as I've been watching the history. And so, but let's talk about the relationship between those two, because there's three elements that are needed: acceptance, understanding, and collaboration. When you're talking about dealing with people who are on teams from diverse groups, you have to be able to accept them, you have to be able to understand them, and you have to have a willingness to collaborate with them, because in business, we're always looking for the new idea. We're always looking for someone who has out of the box thinking. And that's something that you're never going to be able to obtain if you're only seeking ideas from people who look like you. And that's definitely something that Abraham Lincoln understood when it came to winning the Civil War and abolishing slavery, but he did not get there right away. So I'm going to explain that to you. So let's talk about acceptance. Acceptance means, do you see me? Do you really see me? Do you hear me? Do you value my opinion? So not just a quota. If you're looking for a quota, you've already lost and you've already missed the mark, because you need to value that person's opinion. You need to see that they are an intricate part of your team. But most importantly, what do you have in common? Because that is the most important part of acceptance, is that you have to understand that that person has just as much value as you do. So what did Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln have in common? Abraham Lincoln is known for saying he grew up feeling like a slave himself, because during that time, you could rent out your children to the age of 21, which is exactly what Abraham Lincoln's father did to him. He rented him out, where Abraham Lincoln would work from day and night and never see a dime of that money. And he eventually left at the age of 21 on his own when he could legally. We call that, during that time, indentured servitude, which was completely different from what Frederick Douglass experienced, which was slavery in perpetuity, which means your children, your children's children, and your children's children, which was what Frederick Douglass was vehemently against. He was raised into slavery. His father was assumed to be his slave master. He ran away and began to advocate against the abolishment of slavery, not only throughout the United States, but all throughout Europe. He wrote his own biography, and it became a New York Times, our version of a New York Times bestseller, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And he would speak all over the world. Another thing that they had in common was that they loved words and they loved speaking. They bonded over 3 books specifically that they knew from cover to cover: the Bible, Aesop's Fable, and Shakespeare. But they also married up. Mary Todd Lincoln grew up in a very prominent family, knowing more about politics than Abraham Lincoln, and guided him through the way to the presidency. So there would not be an Abraham Lincoln without a Mary Todd Lincoln. Now, Frederick Douglass married Anne Marie Douglass. Anne Marie Douglass was born a free woman, and she had money. She also believed in the abolishment of slavery and knew that her husband, Frederick Douglass, was not able to really work because he was a runaway slave. So she would pay for his clothing, for him to go around dressed like a free man. She would pay for him to travel all over the United States and all over the world, talking about the abolishment of slavery. But then also she would pay for all of his documents and create the documents for his passes, which are now modern day passports. You know, in those spy movies, those people who give you the fake passports, that was what Frederick Douglass's wife was. So there would also be no Frederick Douglass without Anna Marie Douglass. And that's what they had in common. Now that you find that you have something in common, now you need to develop an understanding of that person. Now, are you understanding their ideas and where they're coming from? Now, what happened was the way that they met was Frederick Douglass contacted Abraham Lincoln to talk about the fact that he wanted to abolish slavery. Abraham Lincoln did want to abolish slavery, but what he cared about most was preserving the Union. His idea of abolishing slavery meant that it was something that would happen eventually 100 years later, which would have brought us into the 1950s. Obviously, for Frederick Douglass, that was not good enough to justify him having many generations of his family in slavery in order to preserve the Union. So he did not take Abraham Lincoln seriously, and he left the White House. But Abraham Lincoln started to lose the Civil War. And he thought about something that Frederick Douglass brought up when he came to the White House, which was to recruit enslaved people in the South to join the Union Army. He then invited Frederick Douglass back to the White House on his own dime to advise him. Frederick Douglass was the first Black man in U.S. history to advise a United States president. Now, in business, what are the benefits of understanding? The benefits of understanding is it increases retention. Just like when you value somebody's opinion, they stay with you. Frederick Douglass came back. It increases productivity. So they're able to work harder for you because now they see that they are a valuable member of the team. They're able to enhance strategic planning so they get more creative because they want you to win too. Because when you win, they win. But then let's get to collaboration. So now you understand, you accept them. Now you are understanding exactly their ideas, but now you need to put those ideas into motion and begin to collaborate. And that's what they started to do. So when Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln started to collaborate, that meant that Frederick Douglass was actively going to the South and getting enslaved men and educating them on the fact that they were going to become free in order to, if they joined the Union Army, because then that meant that they could abolish slavery. And with that not happening, if that never happened, I doubt that the Civil War would have ever been won, because it crippled the South economically, because now their free labor is leaving. It now boosts up the retention within the Union Army because you have men that are sacrificing their lives for their own freedom because they know if they do not win this war, they are not free. So they are not only fighting for themselves, they're fighting for generations to come. So you have men that are incredibly loyal that are fighting for this army. And that's what collaboration did between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. Now, how does that affect your business? Now, it increases investors because now investors are looking for diversity within your business. Without diversity, it actually tends to be a negative for you and your business if you do not have a diverse workforce. You attract better talent because now you're casting your net wider. You're looking at different people from diverse backgrounds who have out of the box thinking because that's what you need. You can't have people who look like you if you want out of the box thinking. You can expand your customer base and you can increase your revenue. So that's what the collaboration will bring. But what did it result in for Abraham Lincoln? On April 9th, 1865, the Civil War was won. But 5 days later, on April 14th, 1965, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Now, I actually took this picture at the Ford Museum. This is the chair that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in. Now, not as many people are being killed over race as they used to, but just as many people are losing their jobs. And it doesn't have to be that way. It can be incredibly disheartening and demoralizing, and I have been in those shoes. So I want to talk to the person by giving them a quote from Abraham Lincoln, who has that feeling like their opinion is not being valued. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth, and always feel that your life has ultimate significance. I not only learned about Frederick Douglass from reading, but most importantly, I learned from going on a trip, on a pilgrimage through the Underground Railroad with his great grandson, Kenneth B. Morris. This is us here today on that day. Now, when I sat there, I made a promise. I made a promise I would not only carry on the names of the people who fought for freedom, I promised that I would carry on their legacy of talking about acceptance, understanding, and collaboration. So the person who's in power who's watching this, I am asking you to accept, understand, and collaborate with the people on your team. Thank you for listening, and happy Black History Month.
My name is Delbert Overton DeWitty, and I represent Descendants of DeWitty, a nonprofit organization located in Omaha, Nebraska. Our quest began with the discovery that there were African American pioneers and 185 African Americans who claimed 40,000 acres in a community called DeWitty, Nebraska. We began to tell this untold story of American history, which can be confusing and is often misunderstood. During our research, we discovered that African history is African American history, and American history is inexplicably connected to world history. There is only one story, but historical events are like puzzle pieces. You must put them together. Our first puzzle piece was in America. Let's break it up into 100-year segments. In 1842, a Kentucky slave, referred to as Big John, killed his overseer and escaped with his partner Marge. They made it to the Underground Railroad, where they were helped by Quakers in Ohio, the Walkers. Big John, afraid of being captured, continued on the Underground Railroad to Canada, while Marge remained in Ohio, serving as housekeeper for the Walkers. She would give birth to their son, William P. Walker. William P. Walker would grow up to be one of the early settlers of DeWitty, Nebraska. In the 1700s, there was the Boston Massacre, when Crispus Attucks, the first American killed during the American Revolution, died on March 5, 1770. Here we're showing the 1600s, where there were multiple events connecting African and American history. First, the first slaves arrived in Port Comfort, Virginia in 1619. Two of the slaves arriving in Virginia ended up in Hampton in the William Tucker household. Descendants of these slaves have resurrected an African American cemetery and is today known as William Tucker 1624 Society. John Punch was an enslaved African who lived in the colony of Virginia. Thought to have been an indentured servant, Punch attempted to escape to Maryland and was sentenced in July 1640 by the Virginia Governor's Council to serve as a slave for the remainder of his life. Two European men who ran away with him received a lighter sentence of extended indentured servitude. This is considered the first legal definition of slavery as defined in America. The 1500s highlight the different positions on slavery between the Spanish and the English. Juan Gerardo became the first documented Black person to arrive in what would become the U.S. when he accompanied Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon in search of the Fountain of Youth in 1513. And they ended up in present-day Florida, around St. Augustine. When the Spanish conquistador Pedro Menendez founded St. Augustine in 1565, not only were there black members of his crew, but he noted that his arrival had been preceded by free Africans in the French settlement in Fort Carolina, just a few miles north. In 2016, I discovered that the oldest and most successful African American community in Nebraska was named after my great uncle, Miles DeWitty. I only found out because a Nebraska State Historical Society roadside marker commemorating DeWitty, Nebraska, was installed and dedicated on U.S. Highway 83. We wondered, was it coincidental that African Moors ruled Spain from 711 to 1492, the exact same year that Christopher Columbus began his extraordinary voyage? We decided our second puzzle piece would begin in Spain. This led us to research expedition from Africa through Morocco, across the Strait of Gibraltar, through the Portugal and Spain, at that time called the Iberian Peninsula, while the Muslims called it the Moors, the Umayyad dynasty. The Moors' 800-year reign was defined by battles and skirmishes between Christians and Muslims, but it was not limited to the Iberian Peninsula. There were simultaneous skirmishes between Christians and Muslims over the Holy Land. You must remember the Holy Land is in Africa. Here, they were identified as the Crusades, and their events were from 1095 to 1291. The Crusades were sanctioned by the popes. The Moors ruled Christians, Jews, Muslims, blacks, and whites. As with the Crusades, Pope Nicholas V issued a decree to King Alphonse of Portugal on June 18, 1452, to, quote, enslave non-believers, end of quote. Portugal took this authority, moved into Africa, and created what came to be known as the transatlantic slave trade, which provided the avenue for slavery in America. A related puzzle piece is that Princess Isabella married Prince Ferdinand in 1469. Isabella became Queen of Castile in 1474, but the King of Portugal also wanted to rule there. Isabella defeated him in war in 1479. In the same year, Ferdinand became King of Aragon. Castile and Aragon were then joined under the rule of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. This combined power allowed a unified Spain to expel the remaining Moors from Spain in 1492. This event was possibly more consequential than financing the Christopher Columbus voyage that same year. We traced African Moors' presence in this region back to 218 BC, when Hannibal, an African general from Carthage, attacked Rome, sparking the Second Punic War. Hannibal invaded Italy by crossing the Alps with North African war elephants. This is a critical time period contributing to historical confusion because both Hannibal and Jesus were two Africans who over time became disassociated from the African continent. We began to realize that history is the pursuit of truth. We now use historical reenactments and our newly developed website, The Ultimate Digital Historical Experience, to help individuals connect their genealogy with other well-known historical events. As an example, my family has traced an ancestor, Emmeline Overton, who was born a slave in 1825, to Travelers Rest Plantation in Nashville, Tennessee. She was present there during a Civil War battle occurring on the plantation, where Buffalo soldiers participated in the skirmish. The site is a national monument because it was owned by Judge John Overton, a protege of President Andrew Jackson. The highway sign project was initiated by descendants of Brownlee, Nebraska, a white community, like DeWitty, created due to land allocation allotments by the Kincaid Act of 1904. They were able to work together for a common goal in the sandhills of Nebraska. Maybe it's genetics, but descendants of these communities were able to unite in 2016 to celebrate the establishment of the commemorative sign on Highway 83. We have now embarked on a crusade to create communities beyond boundaries, utilizing historical accuracy and genetics. Won't you join us on our quest? You can join us by registering our website at one word, descendantsofdewittyne for Nebraska.org. That's descendantsofdewittyne.org. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deanna Lynn, and I'm here to speak about anti-bias education in early learning. But first, just a little bit about me. I am from the Chicagoland area. I am an educator. I've been a teacher for 11 years. I've taught grades pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade. I received my master's degree from Roosevelt University in dual language teacher leadership. And I'm also an entrepreneur and children's book author. But I just wanted to speak to you today for a few moments about anti-bias education in the early years. And whether your child attends a daycare, homeschool, or district program, it's essential that your child's teacher recognizes the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, and sense of belonging. And if there is one thing that I've learned from not only my 11 years of teaching experience, but also from the experiences of others, it's that racism and implicit bias is yet alive in our school systems today. Student culture is not always valued. Staff culture is not always regarded. Anti-bias education is not always valued. But the one thing that I've come to realize is that we cannot value what we don't understand. There seems to be this fear of anti-bias education. Creator and entrepreneur Myleik Teele recently said this. She said, so many people are so afraid to say the wrong thing, to do the wrong thing, that they end up doing and being nothing. Wow, how powerful is that? According to the National Association for the Education of Young Children, there are 4 main goals that they have for anti-bias education. The first goal is identity, which is a sense of comfortability and confidence in one's identity. The second goal is diversity, and that is that comfortability with human diversity. The third goal is justice, and that is, that general sense of fairness. And then the fourth goal that they have is activism, which is the willingness to stand up for oneself and for others. And over the last several months, I've had this word, a specific word running through my mind several times, and that word is alpha. And as many of you know, Alpha is the name of the generation that's born after Gen Z, and that includes all children who were born in 2010 or after. So I looked up the definition of alpha, and the dictionary gave me several definitions. The first definition was this: something that is first, beginning. And as I continued to read, I came across this 2-word definition that really struck me. And that was this: socially dominant. And you might be thinking, what does alpha have to do with anti-racist work? Well, there was a pre-K teacher in the state of Illinois this past school year who did a lot of equity work with her preschoolers. And at the end of the school year, just this past May, she asked her students, what was your favorite story from this year? What did you learn in preschool this year? And here were some of the student responses. I learned about the kindness in America. Every human in the Hair book is so beautiful. Malala helped change the rules and told everyone about the bad stuff that happened. I like the book where one is different. We can still be friends. I liked King Jr. And lastly, the Malala book helped girls to go to school. This matters. Anti-bias education matters. Again, socially dominant is what we're striving for. I grew up in the 90s. And one of my favorite television shows in the 90s was a show called Boy Meets World. And I'm sure many of you remember it. And a few years ago, maybe about 6 years ago, they came up with a reboot. So I thought, okay, I will go ahead and try the reboot. And as I watched the series, I noticed there was a recurring question that the teacher asks his students throughout the series. And that was this: what's the secret to life? And according to the show, it's this: people change people. We need a change. We need to be that change. And it's up to us to be the change and be the example for this young generation, these alphas to follow, to lead us toward anti-bias education becoming the norm, becoming the socially dominant. So is it possible that Generation Alpha could be the first generation to become accustomed to seeing themselves represented in children's literature? Could this be the first generation to feel comfortable celebrating differences in others? Could this be the first generation to become accustomed to denouncing racism and bigotry in all spaces without fear? Did you know that Alpha is the brightest star in a constellation according to the Bayer designation? Our future is bright. Our future is bright when we don't just say the right thing, but we become the right thing. And anti-bias education is essential in the early years and can be quite engaging for students. It helps to set the foundation for cultural consciousness in later years.
Eyes are getting tired of this. My backs are hurting, and I just can't take it no more. We ought to steal away. When this is gonna happen, says he. Soon as we can get away, I say. About supper time, I suppose. Yesterday, slavery. Today, freedom. Tomorrow, what? Are we free, or are we still slaves bound? After slavery, we needed more. The 50s and 60s were the decision-making years. Rosa Parks decided that she would not give up her seat on that bus in Alabama to a white man. Miss Parks and others like her chose to confront racism in education and other accommodations rather than to conform to the way things were. The U.S. Supreme Court decided to order school integration with deliberate speed, entitling Blacks to sit and learn in seats that were previously reserved for whites. Although given the opportunities for a better education, have we really taken advantage of those golden opportunities? We go to school and graduate and yet can't read our diplomas. So are we free, or are we still slaves bound? In the 60s and 70s, there were sit-ins, marches, and freedom rides to change the system. It was a time of rioting, Black power, and nonviolent protest. We won the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. This outlawed discriminatory practices in voter registration, public facilities, schools, employment, and public accommodation. But oh, what a price we paid for those victories. The beatings, bombings, and killings all led to inner-city rioting. In 1963, Dr. King's March on Washington drew over 250,000 persons. Today, you can't walk down Pennsylvania Avenue without walking past a homeless living on a grate in front of the White House, many of whom, no doubt, they too marched with King on that great day. They are veterans, citizens of this nation, and have no jobs, no food, no home, no money, no pride, and no dignity. Are we free, or are we still slaves bound? Dr. King was the third Black and the youngest man to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He was assassinated in 1968. So was his living and dreaming in vain? In the 80s and 90s, we were delivered the civil rights battle, opened the doors of opportunity. We voted. 16 Blacks were elected to Congress. We had our first Black mayors in major cities. We moved from the backs of the buses to the driver's seat. We can sit where we like, eat where we wish, and go where we desire. We've gone from being slaves to being mayors and presidential nominees, Supreme Court justices, judges, congressmen, and chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, just to name a few. In the 2000s, we were forced to be seen. We had our first Black billionaire, followed by our first Black woman billionaire the next year. We were no longer picking in the fields, but found ourselves playing in new fields. We were now commanding rooms that were not designed for us as the first Black president of the American Bar Association, the United States Attorney General, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and president of these United States. The table was no longer the only mahogany reflection in the room. As the rooms changed, our responsibilities changed. Would we move in silence or be loud with our intentions? Has our quest to point out every discriminatory or unfair act costing us our freedoms? Is it possible to be a disruptor for change without being a distraction within change? Although Dr. King and others strived and dreamed that one day little Black boys and girls would join hands with little white boys and little white girls, today they do. But do they attempt to wipe away the color? Black men and white men will sit together at these new tables, and today they do. But do they dare rub shoulders? Are we free, or are we still slaves bound? We've tried to come from the backs of the buses, but have we? We've tried to come from the back tables of restaurants, but where do they still try to sit us? We've tried to climb the corporate ladder, but how many rounds have we climbed? Are we free, or are we still slaves bound? In the past 2 years, more than 2 million Black-owned businesses were formed, over 2.8 self-proclaimed Black entrepreneurs, yet only 134,000 were defined as employer firms. Are we building businesses to enrich our communities, helping each other become gainfully employed by using our Black power within? Or are we using our side hustles and side gigs to build generational wealth with measured colored bottom lines? Can we renounce our own stereotypes of carrying $500 handbags but lack $500 in the bag? Can we move from GoFundMe to GoFindMe on the list like Forbes and Fortune? In 2022, banks merged to form the largest Black-owned bank in the United States with more than $1 billion in assets, and the first Black neobank platform launched to purposely cater to Black and brown persons, giving $10,000 to Black or Latino businesses each month. Yet and still, 17% of Blacks don't even have bank accounts, compared to 3% of other races. Our signatures were made to be powerful. Morton, our first Black woman signer of the US currency. And in 2022, what does our money look like? It looks like Maya Angelou. We can no longer complain about no funding when we lack the structure to qualify. So are we free, or are we still slaves bound? We need to make our Black history a thing of the present and not a thing of the past, because our journey from slavery to Dr. King's mountaintop dream and beyond has not been an easy one. Today, our futures are within our control. If we stand tall, stay true to our principles, regain our morals and values, and become well educated, we too can look to our future with pride, hope, and faith. For faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. We have all felt the pain of racism in some ways, and we need to believe in Dr. King's dream as well as the American dream. Dr. King once said, "I will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." He spoke eloquently of his dream. Please permit me to speak of mine. In the uncertain, repressive days ahead, we must as people unite. Together, we can win the victorious battle over illegal drugs, black-on-black crime, and racial inequality. We are so concerned what others are doing to us, but forget what we are doing to ourselves. We can and will live in a world where the words first and black will not define us or have to be worn as the I have a black friend badge of institutions and corporations. Before Dr. King was slain in 1968, his dream was to make a difference. We too can make a difference if we remember those who have fought for our freedom. Here we are today, faced with the same problems with no solutions. So was the striving and struggling, pain and protest, victories won for nothing? Have we gone from the slavery of yesterday to the freedom of today to let tomorrow be a backwards journey? Do we let Dr. King's dream remain a dream, or do we make it a reality? Are we free, or are we still slaves, bound? Though bound by the injustices of this land, our ancestors were free. We cannot change the heart of man, but we can change the course of our lives. We cannot change the beliefs of others, but we can change our outlook on life. Because of their fight and dreams, today we have many freedoms: freedom of speech, religion, and culture. So are we fostering dreams, hope, and prosperity, or choosing to do nothing? Let us do our best in whatever we strive to do. If you want to be a janitor, then clean with confidence. A soldier in the army, perform with pride. An artist, draw with determination. A cook, cook with creativity. And a dentist, pull with perfection. And even if you want to mow lawns, push with power. We must continuously remind America that every citizen has the same rights of freedom, life, and yes, the pursuit of happiness. And upon existence, we were born with a mouth, not a voice. It has slowly been given to us. We were born with the ability to see, but yet forced to hide and be blind to hide the realities. We were born with minds, not opinion. To do so meant blood streaming down our backs. We were born beautiful creatures, but made to wear a mask of untruthfulness. But today, we too are people, Black people, and we now exist.